It's the sort of storytelling with that epic sort of multi-generational epic history storytelling you'd expect from a fantasy book.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of those long-winded, very wordy fantasy books.
Yeah.
And we're dropping hints about their past here, and all this massive gate has been smashed in two, and I wonder who did that.
Yeah.
No, it's holes. They're digging holes.
Just intergenerational trauma and curses.
Yeah.
And the American dream.
Hi, welcome back to Nostalgia Club. This is Michael Keane. I'm a sound designer joined by two fellow sound designers. Please state your names.
Jino Cheng, fellow sound designer.
Victoria Cheng, also sometimes a sound designer.
Oh, I'm sorry, that was a little loud. Could you do it just a little bit softer, please?
What are we doing?
I don't know. Again, this is Michael still not having had any coffee today.
And now the left ear. And now the right ear. And now, get back to work, boys! This ain't a Girl Scout camp!
We're talking about holes,
We're digging
baby.
holes!
We're talking holes. We're talking Louis Sachar's Holes. A little backstory.
Sorry.
A little backstory on this. Over the past however many years it's been of working together, Victoria and I specifically will occasionally share a brain cell. And that can take many shapes and forms, but one of the most consistent for whatever reason is when we talk about trials and tribulations and struggles and ails, we'll just say, you know, something along the lines of, if only this could be different. And then we'll just say, if only the woodpecker sighs.
The bark on the tree was as soft as the sky.
And then I'll go, huh? What? Huh?
And Victoria and I will ignore Jino and complete the stanza.
While the wolf waits below, hungry and lonely, he cries to the moon, if only, if only.
And then Jino sighs and... So yeah, we're talking about Holes, a novel from what year was Holes written, Victoria?
1998.
98.
98.
Wow, that's before 99.
Wow.
I know, how about it? Jino, have you read Holes?
I have read Holes.
Okay.
And I probably watched the movie Holes. I have some recollection of it. I watched the movie. I don't know if you guys watched the movie.
I watched the movie. I was so excited to watch this movie.
I wasn't able to rewatch one because I was unfortunately spending time watching live action.
No, I should have said
Avatar.
prioritize Holes over Avatar.
No. It was better that I want to add more to my media lexicon. I learned things from watching live action Avatar.
But you learned that you didn't like it.
Not my preference. But the big reason I couldn't watch Holes was because I don't have Disney Plus, and it's only on Disney Plus.
There are other ways.
I know there are other ways.
To the library!
Hey, that's valid. Go to your local libraries to rent things out before your local library gets privatized and the collection gets standardized across all national branches of the company that will be running your library. I've had a rough week.
Yeah.
My local library's in trouble. But you know what? We're okay because I got to read Holes. I was reading Holes all the way till like 2:45 a.m. last night.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I sat down and I was like, I got half of this book left. Time to read this book. And it was great. Don't regret a single bit of it.
Love this book. Love this movie. I have read the book and watched the movie when I was younger, but I guess it was a while ago and it didn't really make quite the impression that maybe some other stories have. But I liked it. I liked it then. And I liked it now. Good book.
I freaking love this book.
Clearly, you guys keep quoting it for the last, 5 years or whatever.
I don't know. I think something about this book just, hits that part of my brain that likes how satisfying it is. And so every time I think about it, I'm just like, oh, that was a good book. It's so satisfying. And I think about the movie, which was even better. And, genuinely one of the best book to movie adaptations that exists.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it is because Louis Sachar wrote the screenplay.
Did he really?
He wrote the screenplay.
Nice.
Which very rarely happens. Very rarely do authors get to write or be that involved in an adaptation. Even for the most recent Percy Jackson, Rick Riordan wrote, I think, 1 or 2 episodes and he helped in the writer's room and stuff. But Louis Sachar wrote the entire movie for Holes. Like, it says screenplay by Louis Sachar. It doesn't say Louis Sachar and someone else. It's just him.
And forgive me, this is Wayside Stories,
Yes.
Louis Sachar.
Mhm.
So what a range, because Holes has a lot of like people in dire straits and like characters that are like clearly traumatized, and their trauma isn't like resolved by the end of the story necessarily. They're just like full characters and they go through it.
Yeah.
They're digging them holes.
They're digging those holes. Yeah, I just love it. I reread the book and then immediately wanted to watch the movie again, but I had to wait a few days. So for those 2 days, I was just sitting there being like, I can't wait to watch Holes. Before we get too deep into our thoughts on the book, let's just do a quick synopsis, which in this case, I might just read it from my book.
Do it.
Yeah. Stanley Yelnats' family has a history of bad luck, so he isn't too surprised when a miscarriage of justice sends him to a boys' juvenile detention center, Camp Green Lake. But there is no lake. It has been dry for over 100 years, and it's hardly a camp. As punishment, the boys must each dig a hole each day, 5 feet deep, 5 feet across, in the hard earth of the dried-up lake bed. The warden claims that this pointless labor builds character, but that's a lie. Stanley must try to dig up the truth. Short and simple, Stanley Yelnats gets convicted of a crime he did not commit, goes to camp, digs holes, finds out how to break 2 generational curses, goes home a millionaire. Yay!
And best friends with his childhood hero,
Oh, yeah.
baseball player,
Oh, yeah.
Clyde.
Livingston.
Sweet Feet Livingston.
Sweet
Yeah.
feet. Well, remind me about the movie Holes, because it's been a while since I've been able to see it, but I remember it being fantastic.
Yeah.
Is there a lot of narration in Holes?
The grandfather, Stanley Yelnats II, narrates a bit. He's mostly narrating when telling the story about their no good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. So he does a bit of narration. Aside from that, there's really not that much narration.
But it is extremely faithful to the plot of the book.
Yes.
I don't think they cut anything, really.
There's some slight adjustments and differences and nuances to the movie, but other than that, it's a very, very faithful adaptation. Like, they even, like, some lines are directly pulled from the book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the spirit, the aesthetic, the vibe of the
so
movie
good.
so perfectly encapsulates the feeling of reading the book. Oh, it's beautiful. It's
One
beautifully
thing-
done.
Because I remember this movie very well, but I did not remember that it starts off with a character who is called Barfbag encountering a rattlesnake at Camp Green Lake and taking off his shoe and socks and just like walking up to the rattlesnake. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's how they start the movie?
You only ever hear about it in the book.
Yeah, they only ever talk about it in the book. In fact, like when Stanley first arrives, they're like, oh, something happened to Barfbag. He's at the hospital. But they don't say what happened to him until a little bit later. And they're like, you know, he encountered a rattlesnake. And Stanley was like, oh no, what a horrible accident. And they're like, it wasn't an accident.
But what a perfect way to introduce the setting of the movie, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't get the names of any characters besides Barfbag. You don't really know why they're there.
You don't even know why he's called Barfbag.
Yeah, but you get the desperation, the desolation, how much it sucks.
Yeah, you'll do anything to get out. You'll even get yourself bit by a rattlesnake.
Yeah.
Incredible
rough.
economic storytelling.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so good.
It's incredible economic storytelling, and yet again, they don't cut anything from the book. It's all in there.
I was especially curious about that because my memories of the adaptation were like, oh, like all of these details are in there. All these weird details about Camp Green Lake with all these kids digging holes, all the details about Stanley's backstory, Zero's backstory, the extra backstory about kissing Kate Barlow or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought back, is like all of that.
It's all
It's
there.
all in there.
See, that blows my mind.
Yes.
It's like seamlessly interwoven to the point where like there's even when they flash back to the past, it doesn't feel weird that they're flashing back. I think it does help that, well, Stanley's story is he spends all of his time digging holes.
Yeah.
So it's not like we have to spend a lot of time watching Stanley dig holes. And it's usually like when he's doing that, he's reflecting on these stories that he's heard.
An interesting thing they added is that he does see the ghost of Sam, was his
Mhm.
name? Maybe not the ghost, but like a mirage, an image of Sam, like where he was with his wagon and his donkey, Mary Lou. And so it sort of places Sam's story at the camp, like, oh, this is the past story. So when we
Yeah.
do eventually transition to that story, we get where it's at and we get
Yeah.
why it's important, even though the movie doesn't explicitly tell us yet. It's a really interesting way of connecting those two stories, which in the book, like, connected by just telling us why it's important.
Yeah.
They're also a different adaptation would have truncated scenes, like a scene where Zero asks Stanley, hey, can you teach me how to read? And Stanley brushes him off, and that's it. That's the scene.
Yeah.
In a different adaptation, they would have truncated that scene and added the other scene where he does agree to help teach Zero.
Yeah.
But no, in the movie, like, there are multiple scenes where I expected them to make that jump, and they didn't. They kept the pacing of the book. I mean, it's Louis. Louis kept the pacing of his own book perfectly. Perfectly.
Yeah.
That is so S tier. Like when it comes for adaptations, because like a lot of the adaptations I've seen that I felt like worked well, typically I feel like came from books with less material, or they were taking less material from the books and expanding on that to make a more cohesive like cinematic viewing experience. Even just like Matilda, for example, Matilda, a Roald Dahl is very much like, here's a few episodic adventures of Matilda just going about her life. And then the movie takes a lot of those things and expands some, truncates others, like you said, and weaves it into a more long form 2-hour chunk. But like Holes, the novel, has so much going on. Like you'd think to yourself, like, surely all of this can't make it in to a movie. And yet
It makes it in.
In fact, they actually add more to the movie. Just like a little bit more here and there that aren't in the books.
Like how Mr. Sir is a wanted criminal on the run.
Yeah. And Mr. Pendansky isn't really a doctor or whatnot.
how do you do this? How do you get away with it? I feel like there's like some kind of like key to the kingdom hidden within.
I mean, like, what makes Holes good is that it's such tight storytelling. And like I said, it's so satisfying because all these storylines weave together into one cohesive story. Sure, there's like things after the story ends that you might be curious about learning, but in terms of like plot points, like it fills in all the gaps. So it feels really satisfying. I keep saying the word satisfying, but that's what it feels like to me. It's just really satisfying to read.
There's so much like planting and payoff.
Yes, the planting and the payoff.
And it's like across 100 years of setup.
Yeah, well, actually, like, I would say they do the planting and payoff even better in the movie because, like, for example, the peaches, that's one of the later plants in the book. In the movie, they actually mention it way earlier.
Same with the fact that consuming onions or onion juice makes you
immune to the...
not immune. They just don't want you anymore.
Yeah, the yellow spotted lizards.
Yeah.
They just don't want it. They don't want to bite you. They're like, ugh, onions. Ugh.
I don't remember that in the movie. Did they describe?
It's so slight. It's literally because Sam, he's the onion man. A wagon pulls up while he's selling his onions, and there's like 3 men, but one of the men is dead, like in the cart. And then they're just like, oh, we just got back from hunting or something. And Sam's like, oh, he didn't take my onion juice. That's why he got bitten by the yellow spotted lizard. And that's it.
Oh.
Yeah. And then they buy some juice. But it's in the middle of also introducing his love interest and the antagonist of his story.
Yeah.
It's just like dropped in there in the middle of it, but it's like being swirled, like it's in the center of like a vortex of like other important plot elements. So you're like, oh, okay. And onion juice.
Yeah.
Good against the lizards.
It works because it's relevant to the world building. Like, oh, they live in this town. There's yellow spotted lizards. It plays into like, this is the backstory of where Stanley is at. And so you might not pick up on the fact that it is a plant for Stanley and Zero surviving at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I did still like how Louis did it in the book.
Yeah.
Where in the movie, once Sam's story ends, that's it. Sam doesn't come back. Except maybe in some like ghostly flashbacks or whatever. But in the book, Sam's story ends, but then he keeps coming back in like additional flashbacks to give more context to what's happening to Stanley. And I think it almost exaggerates the tragedy of Sam's story.
Yeah.
Because the 2 additional flashbacks, I'm pretty sure it's 2 additional flashbacks we get, are him interacting with the townsfolk. They're friendly with him, but they also like seem to value him as a member of the town. He's providing an important service, like he's helping people, he's saving people.
Yeah.
And so it adds further context to the town turning on him as like a greater tragedy, a greater evil. Clearly they thought of him as a person, and it was so easy for them to just switch on their racial bias.
Yeah.
In the movie, like it's tighter, it's more efficient.
Sure.
But I don't think it was necessarily like an improvement, as to rather it was just like another way to tell it that was also good.
No, I know what you mean. I had the same experience, like reaching those scenes and being like, oh, there's like a dissonance here, like knowing that the town completely turns on him.
Mm-hmm.
Some very mature themes in this book.
Yes.
I would be afraid, of some kind of parental review board that, owed its authority to no one but certain people within local government got its hands on this book and determined that perhaps it wasn't fit for a public library as opposed to a librarian that's, got a library sciences degree and professionally curates this stuff. But, that's neither here or there. It just came to mind.
That would never happen in these United States of America.
Oh, it certainly
That
couldn't.
would be a true tragedy.
It's unthinkable. Another thing I really like about Holes is how much dang time Stanley and Zero spend just tired out of their minds.
Yeah.
There's a lot of time spent with people tired digging these holes.
Mm-hmm.
But like when Zero runs off and then Stanley goes after him, there's so much time they spend just walking towards the mountain, God's thumb, where they're just like, and then they kept going and they kept going.
Yeah.
And it was real bad.
That's the one thing that the movie loses a little bit is you don't get as much of the sense that they've been walking for a really long time. In fact, they actually make it to God's thumb quite quickly. But like the acting kind of makes up for it because like they're killing it.
Could you dig a hole?
No, I
Me
would
neither.
die out there.
Like the big thing is when they say, okay, your hole's got to be as deep as your shovel. Use your shovel, which is 5 feet, as a measurement. 5 by 5, like it's the first 5, the width that really gets you, I think.
Yeah. 5 feet deep sucks. But if the width didn't matter, it wouldn't suck that much.
Yeah.
5 feet across that's a lot of dirt.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
What is it, 25 cubic feet of dirt or whatever
The
it
biggest
is?
struggle that Stanley has at the beginning of the book is that when he first starts digging, he doesn't know how to properly estimate the space he's going to need and how big his dirt pile is going to be in relation to where his hole is placed. So he basically keeps having to re-shovel dirt and remove dirt because he's like, oh, I've dug 1 foot deep and now suddenly all my dirt is falling back into my hole because the dirt pile is getting bigger than the hole that I'm digging or the space that I have. It sucks. And they talk like Louis Sachar doesn't pull any punches about like the blisters and the exhaustion. Just really feel for Stanley, especially because he was not the one who stole those shoes.
It was Zero.
It was Zero. Zero the Hutt. Notorious gangster
Oh, gosh.
of the Outer Rim territories.
Another reason why I think this book is so satisfying for me is because I love the idea of two characters who are destined to meet. Call it what you will. Fate, destiny. Oh, it turns out your great-great-grandma cursed my grandpa, my great-great-grandfather. Sorry, there's too many greats.
Your ancestor cursed my ancestor because
that's
my
better.
ancestor shorted your ancestor.
Yeah.
By not carrying you up a mountain to drink from a stream.
Yeah.
And now
I'm going to carry you up a mountain and you're going to drink from a stream and then we will break the curses.
Yay!
Yay!
It's great.
And also $1 million.
Yay!
I love how when they find that treasure at the end, it's like clearly not because Kate Barlow, when Trout Walker and his wife roll up on her and are like, you're an outlaw, you hid your treasure around here. She's like, there's no treasure. And they keep insisting to her that she hid treasure. And then she kind of like implies like, all right, you might as well get digging just as like a final screw you.
Yeah.
And eventually the treasure that is more or less found is just, it seems like just something that she pillaged. But
Yeah, it's just one trunk.
yeah.
I'm sure maybe there's more out there. You never know.
You never know. But
Yeah.
it's like, it's not even a lot necessarily.
Yeah. Like
It's described as like being like, oh, it's enough to actually make a really big difference, but it's not like you're Bill Gates.
I think the implication is she stole Stanley Yelnats the first's trunk full of documents saying how rich he was.
Yeah.
Like his, what is his stocks and bonds, right?
Yeah, it's like stocks and bonds.
And then I guess she just
promissory
like
notes.
added some jewels to it and was like, I'll put this in a hole.
Yeah. And that's what it was.
And then it came back to the family.
Yeah.
It was theirs all along.
All along.
It's so satisfying when Zero says it's Stanley's and then the warden is like, no, it's not. What do you mean? And it's like, Stanley Yelnats. Again, the whole plot point of Stanley teaching Zero how to read is also a plant for Zero eventually reading his name on that trunk and like saving the day.
I didn't even fully put that together until you just said, I don't know how.
It's such a well-crafted story.
It's so good because it's like it has multiple functions. Function A, it gets Stanley and Zero to become friends. Function B, it's just like a great insight into Zero's backstory and his character development. C, it comes back because Okay, here's a really good moment in the movie that they added, which is in the book when Zero runs away, he just kind of is like, I'm fed up. Because the warden finds out that he's been digging part of Stanley's hole.
Yeah.
And then she's like, no one's going to do that anymore. You're not going to do reading lessons. It ends here. No more collaboration between you two. And then Zero's just like, I'm done. I'm not going to dig any holes anymore. And he runs away. In the movie, like, Mr. Pendanski is much more just like, he's such an app to Zero. Like, every time he talks to Zero, it's always like demeaning him, belittling him. And it's because like Zero is a ward of the state. He has no family. There's no one cares about him, quote unquote. And so for Mr. Pendanski, he's like, great, I can bully him. No one's going to call me out for it or do anything about it. And so in this scene, when the warden catches them, Stanley and this other kid get into a fight, and then Zero like almost kills the guy. And Mr. Pendanski is like, it's because of all those reading lessons. It's too like complicated for his dumb brain. Like, what does DIG spell? And Zero picks up his shovel and he hits Mr. Pendanski on the head, and he bends down and he's like, dig, and then he runs away. It's so
pretty
good.
friggin'
Literally
solid.
peak.
Doesn't he hit him in the book?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry. He does hit him in the book, but it's like...
It's not as, like, tight.
I think Mr. Pendanski isn't quite so, like, blatantly rude. It's, like, a little more subtle in the book.
He felt pretty... I think in the book, the main difference is that at first, it seems like Mr. Pendanski might have some inclination of actually helping the kids.
Yeah.
And then you learn, not necessarily in a gradual way, but in a more of like, he's not a good adult to be around these kids, when he's just like, the kids should fight. They should fight physically.
Yeah.
That'll solve it. And then when it gets too far, he like threatens to shoot him with a gun. So like in the book, I guess because you can't see him,
Yeah,
you can sort of
that's
place your
true.
own like bias on him. It's like, I mean, he's like not as bad as Mr. Sir. It does seem like he does want to help reform these kids. And then the moment when he turns and he's like, no, he's really bad.
Yeah.
It kind of comes to the shock. But in the movie, you can see him. You can see his like physicality, and you can know there's something wrong with him the whole way through.
Yeah.
Which, isn't he the Buster Scruggs actor?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They got a number of stars on this thing.
Oh my God.
Isn't Sigourney Weaver the
Yeah,
one?
Yeah.
Sigourney
What
Weaver.
a pull!
She's freaking awesome.
Comes
in
in
this
halfway
movie.
through, like Sigourney Weaver jump scare. You're like, I've been here the whole time.
She's so perfect in that role. Also, shout out to the music in this movie.
Oh my gosh!
The music is so good. Like the sequence when the warden first shows up, like that music is like seared into my brain.
Yeah.
It's such a good entrance. The cinematography, because also like if you haven't read the book, up to that point you kind of assume that the warden is a man. So
especially
it
at the
starts,
time that it was made or
Yeah.
written, I feel like it's just more expected.
because it's like at this point the only like people in authority that you've met are Mr. Sir and Mr. Pendanski. And so your internal bias is like, okay, the warden's probably a guy too. And so it starts at her boots and then it slowly goes up and then you see all of her. And then you're like, oh my gosh, it's Sigourney Weaver.
I'd love if the boys reacted like that.
Oh my God, it's Sigourney Weaver. Everyone drops their shovel. They're like, oh, we loved you in all the movies you did. She's like, what?
And then she slaps him across the face with her rattlesnake nail polish.
Yeah. I also just love like the bait and switch of them being like, oh gosh, the warden is so scary. The others have met the warden before, so they're more scared, but mainly we're in Stanley's perspective. So he's like, everyone's so scared of the warden. I'm sure like he's going to be super scary. And then he's like, oh wait, the warden's a woman. And then she acts like very nicely and kindly, but also with an edge of like, oh, she's terrifying at
She's
the same
nice,
time.
but then Mr. Pendanski's like, all right, I filled the water. She's like, I'll kill you.
Yeah. Just so good.
You brought up the music.
Yeah.
Because the score is fantastic. But also they use a lot of, I don't know if a lot of the music was made for the movie or if it was taken from the general pop culture of the time.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of like pop songs, rock music in there that really, not only does it create a certain aesthetic, which is really, pleasant for the movie, and additionally, sorry, I just thought of another thing. It really separates tonally between modern day and the past flashbacks.
Mm-hmm.
Like it really exaggerates the time difference.
Yeah.
But it also plants the movie into a time and space when it could be a timeless movie because they're just in the desert. Of course they have no phones. What time is
Yeah.
it? What year is it? Like this antiquated camp. This could be any time. But the movie says, no, this is the 90s or the mid-2000s or whatever. Right? It plants it. And I think
Yeah.
that's a fantastic choice. because the music's good. I got nothing more to say about that.
No, but it makes sense too, especially when you take into account that like the timeline of its narrative and how like the time between things and the family connection is like important.
It does the timeless thing so well, but at the same time, the time period is very important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to say. There you go.
It's all about 3 generations of 3 different families woven together in different ways.
I love the little detail that like, I mean, it's not like a huge one, and maybe it's a little incidental, but that Kate Barlow was a teacher and would teach, you know, the kids and the adults. And then like on that same spot, even though there's like no pretense for it, Stanley is like a teacher for Zero.
It's like poetry. It rhymes.
It's like poetry.
Wow. I also just realized that.
It's a weird thing that like takes the tragedy of the Kate and Sam backstory and like you see that like literally the things that they planted or like the timelessness of like their goodwill in a way echoes beyond them and beyond like the harm that was like done to them.
Yeah.
The whole thing with God's thumb and like the onions and like, oh, that's where Sam like farmed all his onions. And even well after his like tragic murder, his boat that like sank to the bottom of the lake provided shelter for Zero.
The peaches sustained Zero for at least a little bit longer.
Yeah. And the onions sustained them even more and sustained like Stanley's like grandfather. And it's like
the layers to this onion.
I love that when Stanley's walking further and further away from the camp, he notices that like, because back at the camp, there's like a very systematized way that all these different campers are going about like digging holes. And he notices like the further he gets away, it's mostly a wasteland. But then he would come across just like a random smattering of holes over here that would have like a less systematized like form or size. And then he'd see like another random hole dug somewhere else, like way the hell away from everything. And it's just like this weird environmental storytelling. It sort of sparks your imagination to go like, oh, there was like a whole iterative process of like the warden's like ancestors digging across this giant, massive dry lake bed and like trying to figure out where to dig and where to go.
Brilliant.
And you just like imagine like, oh, the reason they're centered around this one area now is probably because they like found a few things and they're like, there's got to be something around here.
Yeah. One detail that didn't go into the movies was, I think in the book, the warden's cabin is not near the camp. It's a little bit distant, right?
It's like across the lake.
Yeah. And so Stanley, when he gets there, he actually sees that there are holes around the warden's cabin, which is to be presumed it's like her grandfather and her family dug around their home first to try and find it. Which, like, why didn't you fill the holes after? Whatever. But it's like those little hints of like, why are they doing this? Why are they so obsessed with digging holes? Something to do with the warden's family. She's looking for something. What is she looking for? Okay, it obviously has to do with kissing Kate Barlow. Why does it have to do with kissing Kate Barlow? Like, everything just comes together.
It's the sort of storytelling with that epic sort of multi-generational epic history storytelling you'd expect from a fantasy book. Like one of those long-winded, very wordy fantasy books.
Yeah.
And we're dropping hints about their past here, and all this massive gate has been smashed in two, and I wonder who did that.
Yeah.
No, it's holes. They're digging holes.
Just intergenerational trauma and curses.
Yeah.
And the American dream. But just a little bit of that. Mostly in the American nightmare.
The American dream and the much less discussed American nightmare. It did make me think a little bit of our episode on Frindle. And, what's the author's name?
Andrew Clements.
Andrew Clements. Why couldn't I think? It's such a clean
You haven't had
name.
your coffee.
I haven't had my coffee. It made me think of what Jino said about Andrew Clements novels, about there's like some point in every one of those novels where it's like, and then the characters succeed through free enterprise and American spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got a little bit of that with like, and then our main characters succeed.
I think Holes is a little more critical about the American systems in place.
Much so.
The injustice of it all. That seems to be a major theme of the book is injustice.
Yeah.
Masquerading as justice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they make it a point to say that Stanley is innocent, but he couldn't even have a chance to prove his innocence because his family couldn't afford a lawyer. And so he just got sent to camp because no one could defend him. And it was only after his father figured out his invention that they could hire a lawyer. And all it took was like asking some kids in his class what Stanley was doing at noon on this day, right? Like it was so easy, but he couldn't because he was too poor.
Yeah. And then his perceived guilt
Yeah.
got him in more trouble because they were like, oh, he must have stolen the sunflower seeds. He's in here for stealing.
Yeah.
And that sort of escalates. And Stanley the whole time is like, I didn't do the thing in the first place.
Yeah. And
It's,
Zero's the only one who actually knows. Because once Stanley gets to camp, the other boys are like, oh, what'd you get in for? And he's just like, well, there's no point in like the semantics of like, well, I got caught for stealing shoes, but I didn't really steal the shoes. They just happened to fall on me. But like, he just says, I stole shoes. And Zero's like, I know you didn't steal those shoes.
That's another thing. Stanley is so intensely likable, not just because he's kind, but he is sensible. And not just that he's sensible, but that he doesn't go out of his way to make trouble in the way other protagonists might. He never stands up and insists that he's innocent, right? He never rats on anyone, right? He never stirs the pot. He is so consistently safe.
Yeah.
He's doing everything he can to stay safe. And the reader, as a reader, you respect that because you're like, the plot's not moving forward because you were making mistakes. It is moving forward despite the mistakes you have not made.
Yeah.
It's nice. It's refreshing to read that.
Yeah.
Instead of like, oh, a cacophony of misunderstandings and unfinished conversations and woe is me. It's like, no, like I'm doing my best to retain my personal sense of honor, and it just keeps happening to me.
Well, and it even feels, I almost feel like it's easier to identify with as well. Because I think a lot of us in general wouldn't necessarily, if put in his position, especially at his age, a lot of us wouldn't necessarily be quite as proactive as we might imagine
like,
a traditional.
Sucks. Yes, I'm here now.
He understands the deck stacked against him. He gets that. Other protagonists might not. And then when he finally does take action after, thinking about it for a couple of days, it's so much more satisfying.
Yeah.
Running away, stealing the truck, which is really, in the book, it's like it's a very quick moment because, I mean, that's what it is. But in the movie, they really they let him have his fun in the truck. They let Mr. Sir run after the truck and grab on, and Stanley like yanks him off, and Mr. Sir falls in a hole. It's a whole thing. It's really a lot of fun.
One of the greatest moments, yeah.
I don't know if this happens in the book, but in the movie, all the boys run up and gather around, and they're all cheering and waving their hats as he runs off in the sunset.
I really love the camaraderie between all the characters.
Like they're constantly picking on each other and making each other miserable, and they hate each other. But when it really comes down to it, they all understand that the real bad guy is the state.
Yeah.
And they will all cheer when the state gets punished.
Oh, one of the details I noticed in the movie, which I hadn't noticed before, like on this last rewatch, when Stanley first gets his nickname, all the boys have nicknames, but it's like a rite of passage. You got to earn that nickname. So he bumps into a guy or like accidentally trips and falls on a guy, and then they get into a fight. But Stanley's like, whoa, dude, I'm not going to fight you. And in the background, you can see like Zero, he's just playing pool. But then he immediately stops what he's doing. He picks up his pool cue and he like walks around the table, and he's just like in the background while Stanley and the other kid are in the foreground arguing, and Zero's just there. He's like ready. He's like, if this guy like hurts Stanley, I'm gonna go in.
Wow.
And it's such a small, like I never noticed that before because your focus is on the argument.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Zero's just in the background. There's just like a brief shot of him, like that's like a close-up of him going around the table, but the rest of the boys are also kind of like gathering. So this is like the first time that I noticed Zero in particular doing that.
It's foreshadowing for Zero's ready to maim a boy.
Yeah, I mean, it's just
friend.
like as soon as Zero realizes Stanley is here because of me, I think he has that sense of like protectiveness and defensiveness. He's like, okay, I'm the reason he's here, but I can at least try and like stand up for him while he is here.
And it becomes a purpose, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, what's your purpose? Zero's got very little to hold on to. I love that, especially when it comes to sort of examining the idea of like, I can't think of like the academic term or phrase for it, but punishment being used as, especially like corporal punishment, being used as an excuse for reparative time spent or time served. the idea that the characters, including Mr. Pendanski, who's presented a little more favorably to us at the beginning, like we said, describing the fact that you're digging holes is important for building character. And like, this is about making you into better citizens who can re-enter society. And there's that, they have that conversation in the tent where Mr. Pendanski's talking to him, and it's like, tell me, what are the things that you're interested in? What do you want to do when you get back into society? Because you all have to be productive citizens now. And when they get to Zero, Zero's just like, I like digging holes. And it's like, yeah, that's what you're teaching them, man. You're not teaching them anything.
Yeah.
You're teaching them to do nothing, to obey and keep their heads down and do the most mindless, pointless task with no explanation. And it's only when Zero like gets that relationship with Stanley and he starts learning to read that he actually is like, he's able to gather the strength and like self-confidence and like possession of his own identity to be like, I hate this. This is awful.
Yeah.
And it's not like, they never like out and out explain it to you. I say they. Louis Sachar specifically never out and out says, and Zero probably got the motivation for, no, he just presents the information to you.
Yeah, because he trusts his audience.
Yeah.
He's like, they're going to get it if I perfectly craft this meticulous story.
My copy of Holes didn't have anything at the end besides maybe a chunk out of the Camp Green Lake Survival Guide, which I thought was an interesting choice. But Victoria, didn't your copy have an interview with Louis Sachar?
Yes, there is an interview with Louis Sachar because I got the Newbery Medal version of the book, which was like for the 10th anniversary. And so it has the Newbery Medal on it and such. At the end, he has an interview where he kind of talks about, like, thank you for this award. Like, I'm really glad that people resonated with it. And then there's like a little bit of backstory about how he came up with the idea for Holes. One thing I thought that was interesting was that originally, when he was first developing the story, Kissin' Kate Barlow was going to be the warden's family member, like her grandmother or something. The warden's backstory was going to be like she spent her whole life trying to find her grandma's buried treasure. And then as he was developing Kate's character more, he realized he liked her too much for her to be related to the warden. So that's where it kind of branched off. And then the warden's family instead was the antagonist of Kate's story.
I like that version better.
Yeah, I do too. Speaking of Kissin' Kate Barlow, what a badass.
I feel like it just wraps up further into that whole, what a tight story and how clean and all the setups and payoffs and everything. Because, like, her whole moniker, like, Kissin' Kate Barlow, just comes from the fact that she was objectified by the people of this town. And, like, what the sheriff says to her when she's begging him to help her because they're going after her true love.
So sad. Speaking of which, the most romantic line ever. I can fix that.
Oh, my gosh. It blew my mind how fast Louis Sachar could tell such an evocative love story.
Yeah. In terms of like time in the book and time in the movie, there's not like a whole lot of screen time developing their relationship.
Yeah.
But you can tell it's
a very Princess Bride, as you wish kind of thing.
I would say it's better than The Princess Bride. Not to knock The Princess Bride, which is incredible, an incredible story. But I mean, I think it's the tragedy of it that just deepens the impact of the story. But also, it's the sense that in The Princess Bride, it's just like, and there are these two people living in the middle of nowhere by themselves, I guess. Like, there's no mention of anyone else around. And they're just like, they fall in love. Wow, how cute.
I guess it also has to do with, like, one's, like, preference for, like, the will they, won't they part. Because in Princess Bride, it's like, she's very haughty and, farm boy, do this. And he goes, as you wish. And it's like, oh, there's a dynamic here. There's some tension boiling. But with Kate and Sam, it's much more mutual from the get-go.
And the tension is that they can't.
Yeah.
They can't do it, but they do. And they do it any way they can because they can't, but they must because they're in love. And then it's sad.
And then it's sad.
It's so sad.
Oh, this book. You know what I realized last night at 2:45 a.m. or thereabouts? I was like, okay, both of you, just think of some animals. Like, just some animals, like zoo animals that you learned about when you were a kid.
Zoo animals?
Yeah.
Like tigers?
I was going to say armadillo,
bears?
but I don't know if that's a zoo animal.
It could qualify. Just give me some.
Armadillo, aardvark,
Giraffes,
anaconda,
zebras, penguins.
I almost said artichoke.
Yeah, that all tracks. Giraffes are interesting, right? I mean, they're pretty normal. But are they normal? Or have we just gotten used to the notion of a giraffe because we've been aware of a giraffe since we were like kids?
Like the concept of if you described a rhino to someone, they wouldn't be able to draw one.
Yeah.
Because like, what is that?
Yeah.
Or even an elephant. Think about an elephant for a sec. Big old round body, tree trunk, legs, a face with an arm on it that's like a tentacle that grasps things and can pat you on the head, but it's also its nose, and it sucks water into it, and that's how it and sprays into its mouth, and that's how it drinks. And also it's got giant ears and randomly 2 huge tusks. Pretty weird, right?
Yeah.
Pretty almost like miraculous. Like, why does that exist of all things? Holes is the same thing as an elephant and a giraffe. Holes, I think we were all exposed to when we were little.
Yeah.
And it was like, wow, what a great book. And wow, what a great movie. And returning to it, I was like, this thing is a miracle. The platonic idea of a giraffe and the platonic idea of most zoo animals is like the same thing as like the conceit of holes in its completeness. We take it for granted because it's always been there, for us at least. But it's like truly standout.
Yeah. I was really wondering where you're going with that.
I know.
I like the metaphor. I like it a lot.
It's a good metaphor.
It's weird. I thought of it and I was like, I gotta bring this up.
So what
It's
you're
gonna
saying
confuse.
is We Don't Deserve Holes by Louis Sachar.
Hey, look, I'm not saying whether or not we deserve holes or elephants or giraffes. I'm saying it exists, and it's wonderful that it does.
It is. It is.
Another thing that Louis mentioned in his interview was that a lot of people frequently ask him if yellow-spotted lizards are real. Speaking of animals that shouldn't exist.
Right.
But he always thinks that's such a funny question because they're so convenient to the plot of the story. Like, obviously they are made up. Where else are you going to find an animal that just so happens to not bite people who eat onions?
And is like just right there.
Yeah.
Has an incurable poison.
Yeah. And it's so deadly you'll die like in seconds if you get bitten.
There was something in the Camp Green Lake survival guide about the yellow-spotted lizards and how their spots are actually not very visible. And so it's strange that they were named yellow-spotted lizards when that's not the first thing you would notice about them, which I think it's fun.
It makes me think of like bird naming conventions a little bit. Not that I know a lot about birds, but...
Like Jonathan's warbler, and you're like, guess it's Jonathan's.
Mr. Sir's reaction to the yellow-spotted lizards in the movie is really funny. There's like several sequences where he just stalks around the camp with his gun and is just like...
Mr. Sir is a character in the movie. In the book, he's a character. But in the movie, he's a character.
Yeah.
Is it... Wait a minute. Who plays him?
Look it up.
I was going to say Jonathan Voight, but it couldn't be
No,
Jonathan.
I think that's it.
Is it
I think
really?
it is,
That sounds
yeah.
very familiar.
Yeah, John Voight.
Oh my gosh. What a character actor.
Yeah.
Was he in a movie that was about like a kung fu dog?
What?
I think you can look up YouTube videos of this. I think there's a movie where Jonathan Voight is the bad guy in a movie where there's a dog that's like a martial arts expert of some kind or something.
The Karate Dog?
I think that's got to be it. Just go to YouTube if you please and type in Karate Dog John Voight.
This looks terrifying. Are you kidding me? This looks terrifying. How dare you make me watch that, Michael?
Yeah.
How dare you? He really did stand at a dumpster and throw trash at a dog.
Yeah.
And a terrible CGI dog.
Wow. Speaking of the Camp Green Lake survival guide, there is one quote that I saw a lot of people talking about that is pretty cool, so I just wanted to read it. It basically says, "But don't forget who you really are. And I'm not talking about your so-called real name. All names are made up by someone else, even the one your parents gave you. You know who you really are. When you're alone at night, looking up at the stars, or maybe lying in your bed in total darkness, you know that nameless person inside you."
Wow. I like that.
Thanks, Louis Sachar. Okay, sorry, circling back to Kate and Sam. One detail, which you probably noticed, but I just wanted to talk about it because it's so good, is that like the motif of the rain, like the start of their like relationship is on a day when it's raining and Kate asks Sam to fix the roof for her. And then from then on, the first time they kiss is also when it rains. After he dies, is it raining on the day he dies? I forgot. No,
I don't think
it's
so.
not, because they're setting the school on fire. But anyways, after he dies...
No, it couldn't have been. They were committing arson at the
Yeah.
school. Just very logical procession.
after he dies, that's when it stops raining. It's as if Kate just like physically stopped the sky from raining because it would remind her of Sam.
Ah.
Dang. Sad.
And yet beautiful at the same time.
Yeah.
I'm very glad we got to relive this story.
Honestly, I already want to rewatch the movie again.
Oh,
Do it.
I gotta find my way into a Disney Plus subscription. I have to very legally find my way into
You
a
can watch
Disney
on my
Plus.
computer after this.
Hey, there we go. Breaking no laws. Won't be sent to Camp Green Lake.
Disney, you did
Won't need to
not
dig
hear me
holes.
say that.
Oh my gosh. It's like not even a sharing your account thing. It's like, no one but you can watch Disney Plus.
Only your eyes.
They have like a sensor at the front of the computer, and if they don't sense your eyes, if they sense someone else's eyes, it shoots a laser at the eyes, blinding them forever. Or until you pay a small fee to Disney and then they unblind your eyes. They can do that now remotely.
Oh, gosh. Does anyone have any last thoughts on Holes, on Louis Sachar, on Stanley Yelnats? Stanley?
You good?
No. Has anyone ever read Flat Stanley?
Yeah. What's up with that? They were like, what if this boy got crushed by a poster board and now he's flat
now.
and we can mail him places?
I don't especially remember that.
It was like a whole series of books. Flat Stanley, the boy who's flat, and that's the plot. He's flat now, and it causes all sorts of hijinks. They literally put him in a big envelope and they mail him. And that becomes like a thing. That became like a scholastic gimmick. Like, like buy a Flat Stanley, like mail him around and like write on him and stuff. And there's multiple Flat Stanley books. At the end of each book, they find a way to pump him back up again. Like he becomes unflat. And then in the next book, oops, flat again.
This almost
It's
feels like a
because of
metaphor.
his no good, dirty, rotten great-great-grandpa. Stealing great-great-grandfather.
That feels like a metaphor for something.
For
I don't know, depression. Children's books, kids media, absolutely fascinating. Because you can do things like, what if I just made a kid flat? What if that's the gimmick? He's just a flat guy.
And then you become very successful off of it, I assume. I would
Yeah.
not know.
They wrote a lot of Flat Stanley books.
This kid's not going to be okay in 20 to 30 years. He's going to need a chiropractor. That's
Just
for
like
sure.
me.
Thanks for reading and watching Holes.
Yeah. If you're listening to this episode and you haven't recently reread or rewatched Holes, you should.
Yeah.
Because I'm telling you, it's just as satisfying as it was when I don't know how old I was when I read this book, probably like 10. It's just as satisfying now as when I was 10. Oh, another thing. Sorry.
Yeah, go for it. Go.
One more thing. When I was rewatching the movie yesterday, there's a line that Kate says to Sam. Basically, Sam's like, if you buy my onions, you'll have a long life, just like my donkey, Mary Lou. She's over 100 years old just because she eats onions every day. And Kate's like, jokingly, she's like, how would you know that, Sam? You're not a day over 25. And I was like, oh, God, I'm Sam's age.
A
I
hardworking
was like,
entrepreneur,
25
too.
feels like that's too young for Sam's actual age. But I guess back then it's like, you're an adult. You have a job. It just feels weird. I'm like, I'm
Perspectives
25.
change. When you're a kid, you're like 25. Whoa.
Yeah, that's so old. Now I'm like, you feel older because you have your life together, unlike me.
He's running a small business.
Yeah.
He has a vehicle.
Strong as heck, yeah.
Yeah, and a boat.
He has so much riz.
He's got so much. It's really he's like doing a little bit of like quasi medical practice on the side with
that
onion
clearly
oil.
works.
Yeah.
In the logic of this world,
Yeah.
it does work.
Yeah. It's
And
not just
he's-
fake. Like, it legitimately saves lives.
He's got an animal. He's got a pet.
Yeah.
Cares for the pet. He's great with DIY stuff.
Yeah.
He can practically build / repair a whole schoolhouse
Yeah.
on his own.
Shout out to Sam. You're really setting the bar high for 25-year-olds. Well, that's it for Holes. If you liked the episode, please subscribe, give us a like, rate us on your podcast platform of choice. It really helps us. And if you have any ideas for what you want us to cover next, email us at nostalgiaclubpodcast@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at nostalgiaclubpodcast. Until next time.
You know what we didn't cover is the second stanza of the song that they sing.
Oh, yeah. There's actually like different iterations of the song. There's like the original song, and then there's the version that I think like Elia Yelnats wife retranslated or something so that it actually rhymed in English because the original is in Latvian.
Yeah.
And then they translated it. That's why it's slightly different at the beginning of the book. And then there's like a second stanza that Zero knows, I think it was.
Yeah, at the very end, it's implied that Zero, who lost track of his mom and became a ward of the state, and kind of homeless, he got the same song sung to him because they both come from the same part of the world and the same, like, cultural ancestry or whatever. It's very vague. It's just generically Latvian, whatever that means in the context of this story.
Should I read it?
I would love to, because we got the first half.
Yeah.
And the second half is a nice completion.
All right. It says, if only, the moon speaks no reply, reflecting the sun and all that's gone by. Be strong, my weary wolf, turn around boldly. Fly high, my baby bird, my angel, my only.